Our next panelist that I'm going to introduce to you now is Anna Cummins. She is co-founder and interim executive director of the Gyres Institute. She has more than 20 years experience in environmental nonprofit work, including marine conservation, watershed management, and sustainability education. Anna received her undergraduate degree from Stanford University and an MA in International Environmental Policy from the Middlebury Institute for International Studies. Anna and her husband, Marcus, co-founded Gyres in 2009 with a mission to drive global engagement on plastic pollution solutions through science, education, and adventure. Please welcome Anna Cummins.
So thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here. The last 2 days have been really a deep dive into so many aspects of our addiction to fossil fuels, the existential environmental justice, and economic threats. So our organization works on a slightly different, but as we've seen and talked about, related side of this equation, which is plastic pollution. And we really got our start as an organization looking at downstream issues associated with plastic in the ocean. But along with the movement and a growing realization, a growing body of research that really shows the undeniable links between plastic pollution, plastic production, fossil fuels, climate change, and public health, we're starting to see those intersections much more strongly. And those who attended last year would have heard a presentation from the Center for International Environmental Law, really shining the light on this proposed petrochemical build-out that I'm sure many people here are aware of. So what I'm going to share a bit about is what's at stake if this comes to pass in terms of impacts on our marine and freshwater ecosystems, and then a couple of thoughts for solutions going forward. So Gyres has spent the last 10 years looking at plastic pollution across the world's oceans and many freshwater systems. And what we have seen in our over 50,000 miles of aquatic research is that plastic pollution is ubiquitous. From the ice cores of the Arctic to the surface of the human lung to virtually every compartment of the globe where we have done research and many others with us, we see evidence of plastic pollution. It's a fairly new material, though, when you think about it. It's really just been in the last 50 to 100 years that plastics have come to really dominate our consumer lives. So when I think about how we got to this point in history, I'm drawn to this quote, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it. This is 1944, so keep that in mind. It is important that in planning for the post-war period, we give adequate consideration to the need for ever-increasing consumption on the part of our people as one of the prime requisites for prosperity. 1944. So I find this quote both chilling and also comforting in a strange way. Chilling in that it was so calculated. To really usher in this age of disposable living and planned obsolescence as a need to stimulate the economy. The comforting part is that we did indeed manufacture and create and market this problem, and we're certainly at a point in history where we can undo with the, I suppose, the leadership and the goodwill. So let's see, can we advance here? Yes, I often begin, and I actually have a hard copy of this that we found on eBay. This is an article in Life magazine from 1955, and the article's titled Throwaway Living. This is when plastics are first entering the average American household with great celebration. And the quote, the beginning lines in this article say, "The objects you see flying around in this photo would normally take 40 hours to clean, but no housewife need bother. It is all designed to be thrown away." Of course, those words and that concept of throwaway is coming back to haunt us. You know, this concept, before we were aware of the dangers and the linkages between fossil fuels and so many ecological issues, this concept caught on like wildfire. And we have seen our production of plastic explode and increase exponentially over the last 50 years or so. You can see the trajectory, it's an upward climb. And as of 2014, roughly 311 million tons These numbers are expected to double or triple in the coming decades. And if we do indeed lock in this petrochemical expansion, then that would spell really bad news. What has not kept pace with this level of production, though, is our ability to recover and truly recycle this material. This has already been referred to in the chat, but a paltry 9% on average of plastic in our world has ever been recycled. And I put that in air quotes because we should really say recovered. We are starting to see that recycling is a false bill of goods that we have been sold. So we recover a small amount. Of the plastics that we recover, roughly 2 to 3% is truly destined for closed loop recycling. And by that, I mean bottle to bottle. So where's the rest going? Well, a lot of it's getting incinerated, which I don't need to tell this audience has devastating public health impacts. And much of it is leaked or lost into the environment. And that is the piece that we set out to study when we first started our organization. The plastics that are leaked into the ocean that float are caught in these massive rotating oceanic systems called gyres. And there are 5 subtropical gyres, as the name of our organization would suggest. We have surveyed all 5 of these gyres and seen that this is truly a global problem. Yes, so we all have coworkers with us. Now, we got our start as an organization following on the footsteps of the Algalita Marine Research Foundation that had worked in the North Pacific. I had a chance to sail across the Gyre in 2008 and see this issue firsthand for myself, which was a life-changing issue, really, to see these vast areas of blue water dotted with small amounts of plastic spread out like a smog rather than an island or a contained patch for thousands and thousands of miles. This voyage to the Gyre for me in 2008 was also where the director of research and education fished out some derelict fishing gear, fashioned a ring, and proposed. So that really sealed the deal for our taking on this issue in both life and as a partnership. The first project, though, that we did really was to drive awareness to this issue, how quickly the issue was expanding. So we built an ocean-going raft out of 15,000 plastic bottles that my husband, Marcus, sailed from Long Beach to Hawaii. This was a bit of a publicity stunt to get new eyes and ears to the research. And on this voyage, intending to eat this fish, Marcus fished this out of the water, cut open the stomach, and found 17 pieces of plastic inside the stomach. I could talk at length about the research coming out monthly, if not weekly, showing microplastics and nanoplastics in a long list of consumer goods. On a personal level, I was curious about my own body burden when we did indeed get married after doing an outreach bicycle tour down the West Coast, and did a body burden study looking for trace levels in my blood serum of PCBs, DDT, flame retardants, and PFCs. And we found all 4 present in my blood. Now, that's obviously not a scientific study, sample size of 1 person, but many others of these studies have been done. And while we can't see for certain what the contribution of plastics are, what we do know is that plastics in the ocean and in the environment can be a vector for hydrophobic and oleophilic contaminants that adhere to the plastics, concentrate, get into the food chain, and potentially wind their way up the food chain. So this is what inspired us to start 5 Gyres in 2009, to really expand the research that had been done on plastics to a global level and utilize this scientific research to leverage solutions. So we invited the public to join us. We have had over the last 10 years artists and policymakers, even CEOs of companies, one plastics company, the public to come on board with us on these expeditions to help us do the research and then publish the data. So we coupled our data from around the world with science from 10 other scientists from around the globe to come up with that first global estimate in 2014. Now, this is floating plastics because there are other plastics that get suspended in the water column and sink. But this is what we found in 2014, and we are working to update this model. We then expanded to the Great Lakes to try and better connect with people who don't live on a shoreline to understand this issue. And researching the Great Lakes in 2012 and 2013 is where we found evidence of microplastics from consumer products, from facial products, body washes, scrubs, from personal care products. Now, we published the data. We felt we had a smoking gun, which we took directly to some of the large manufacturers of these products. And what we were told was, until there is definitive research that shows it's our beads going into the Great Lakes, there's more research needed. We were hoping that this smoking gun would be enough for voluntary corporate engagement, but when you're talking about an expensive design change, sometimes regulation is needed. So as a coalition of many organizations working collaboratively, we did ultimately get a federal bill passed in the final weeks of 2015 when former President Obama signed the Microbeads Free Waters Act. Lots of takeaways from this that perhaps we can get into later. We are now revisiting all of the science that's ever been published since the 70s to come up with a better trend analysis. And what's been interesting looking back on the data is back in the 80s and the 90s, roughly between 85 and 90, there was somewhat of a leveling off in terms of plastics entering the oceans and being kicked out. And though we can't say for certain, the best correlation is that was around the time when we introduced global legislation to prevent dumping at sea. So it really speaks to the importance of policy change. Now, as we think about trying to get back to those levels, a couple of shifts in the landscape that are important to look at. The first is what we've already spoken about, this massive petrochemical build out to the tune of upwards of $200 billion to either build new or expand existing infrastructure around plastic. And some great research on that from Shale. The impacts on environmental justice, the linkages between this build out and environmental racism, which I know has been talked about a lot. After seeing a toxic tour in Houston, I was inspired to do a similar thing in my own hometown of Los Angeles, where we are the largest urban oil field in the country. And there you can see plain as day, it's in communities of color where these refineries and facilities are built. Then the falling out 2 years ago, the collapse of our recycling market in the States when China stopped taking our dirty mixed plastics. And of course, that has had tremendous repercussions. And it's starting to peel back the layers for the public to understand that perhaps recycling is not what it was cracked out to be. And then as Mark referred to, during this pandemic, it's really also ripped off more Band-Aids to show our failing fossil fuel industries. And there has been a very intentional, insidious attempt by companies to really leverage this pandemic moment and really push disposables. And we're seeing that happen all over the state. And this has already been talked about. What I want to point out here as people are talking about pellet loss is that plastic pollution really is a form of an oil spill that can't be cleaned up. You can have citizen volunteers out handpicking these nurdles around the world, but that will only be a drop in the bucket for the 1.6 million metric tons of pellets that are proposed for one of these plants, which has been talked about quite a bit. Now, some of the high-level solutions, and this is what we as a movement with many partners are working on. One is national policy. As a movement, we have spent decades working on banning this product, banning bags, banning straws, rather than looking at more comprehensive approaches to ban single-use plastics. And there's a great push right now for the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act being pushed at the federal level to demand producer responsibility as well. Global cooperation on source reduction. It's not enough for companies to make commitments unless they can show that we're actually reducing the amount of plastic that we're making. Proven models of success at the local level that can scale around reuse systems. We will need, although I am always an advocate for reuse, non-fossil-based packaging alternatives that are truly biodegradable and can be vetted and scaled. And then, of course, we need green jobs to start working towards a just transition. So we're seeing this change happen on the policy level with a push for more comprehensive approaches. I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time. Show a couple examples of what we mean by these reuse systems that are starting to get traction. Of course, nothing can compete with virgin plastics for price, but we're starting to see that the externalities just are not worth the short-term costs. So looking at systems that we can implement where we're constantly reusing rather than disposables. We are embarking on a new study to better understand one potentially promising biomaterial, which is PHA, not to be confused with PLA. clay, which is not marine degradable and needs municipal composting to break down. And I can keep you posted on this in about a year's time when we finish this study, looking at potential alternatives for ag mulch and also disposable products. And just to conclude, we have recently gained the dubious distinction of being the largest global exporter of plastic waste in the world. So we have a moral obligation to export innovation and solutions. Thank you so much.